Ladies and gentlemen.
안녕하십니까 신사숙녀 여러분. 저는 데이비드 앱쇼라고 합니다.
With CSIS and now run the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress, and it's a great pleasure and honor for us to be associated with the Korean Institute at SAIS in this very important endeavor. Don Oberdorfer couldn't be with us today. I had lunch with him recently, and he's a wonderful leader. His biography of Mike Mansfield was extraordinary. He contributed to our 76 case studies on that, and he has the long view of Washington, the long view of Asia. So it's great to be with Ambassador Hubbard again with his distinguished career. This alliance is close to my heart. I did a piece on June 25th, 1995, at the dedication of the Korean War Memorial. I was class of '51 at West Point. Our class at West Point before me, we lost about half of them in combat in that early phase of the war. And, you know, I had not realized, as I say in the piece that I wrote for the newspaper about that time, which is in the folders we've left with you, but in the last 3 months of the war, my country was fighting on principle. The American public did not know it because of the North Korean prisoners of war. Most of them did not want to be repatriated, and that's what hung up the negotiations. And we were on principle as not giving up on that they should have their freedom of choice. I was scheduled to go in a daylight attack. The Chinese had decided to show force in the last 3 months of the war in some very devastating attacks. And fortunately, at 1 o'clock in the morning, my attack was called off. The 1st Marines had sent a company up there and had been wiped out. So I might not have been here had I gone into that attack. But this takes me to what we're talking about today, greater strategic challenge of the balance of power in Asia. And our title, which is well put, Leadership Matters, the US-ROK alliance. That was an alliance cemented in the blood of our comrades. I had in my company 45 of ROK soldiers. The greater strategic challenge of the balance of power in Asia, I believe that the next 10 years, South Korea, of Japan, and the United States are key. Henry Kissinger's got a new book coming out. I don't know what he says in the book, but I know what he says off the record. I guess I shouldn't say it here. So anyway, I'm sure he says it on the record too. But China can go either way, depending upon the inducements. And if we keep the balance of power in Asia, it can go in the direction we want. South Korea, Japan in deep distress, and the United States become key. And as I say, the alliance between South Korea and us, it was a successful war, unlike in Vietnam. So I think this is a very important meeting. I'm honored to be a part of it. I hope we can develop some follow-up to this, because I think we're working out a strategic narrative for my country the next 10 years. I think that's important for your country. It's important for Asia. So again, it is an honor for me to be here and participate with you today. And I turn it over to Ambassador Hubbard at this point.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abshire. I'm really honored to be here today with you and to share this event with your your important organization. I'm here today in my capacity as chairman of the advisory board of the SAIS Korea U.S. Institute. Don Oberdorfer asked me to do this several years ago. I don't think at the time either of us expected that I would be substituting for Don as often as I am, and I really would like to see him here, and I'm sure we will at the next event. It is especially a pleasure for me to be here also with our honored guest and speaker, Minister Lee Jae-oh. I've also had an opportunity, a couple of other occasions, to introduce Minister Lee and have had the honor to meet him quite often, including about 2 weeks ago in Seoul when he told me he would be making this trip. This is, I think, a particularly interesting and important time to have this meeting on the U.S.-Korea relationship. I think it's safe to say that there has never been a time when Korea was held in higher esteem by the U.S. administration than it is now with the Obama administration. As many of you noticed, President Obama mentioned Korea with great admiration several times in his State of the Union message, and I think that is sincerely felt. Korea indeed has been an important ally at a time when we've needed such an ally in Asia and the world. It's also a positive time to talk about Korea because I think we are finally on the verge of submitting the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement to Congress, where I feel certain it will pass before too many months from now. I think this is a very critical agreement, not only for the economies of both countries, but also as a strengthening and a deepening of this alliance that we've relied on for so many years. And certainly it's a time of great uncertainty in the world, and that uncertainty is not only in the Middle East, but also spreads to North Korea, where I think we have not had any really bad news lately. No more attacks for several months now. We haven't had any good news either, and I think we still have the huge task ahead of us of finding some way to pursue our objectives of diminished tension, denuclearization, and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Ambassador Abshire's own Korean War experience tells us how important that is. So I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce Minister Lee. Minister Lee gave me a copy of his book when I saw him in Seoul a couple of weeks ago, and throughout that book is a smiling face. And I think I can't think of anything I like better than a politician who smiles, and particularly a smiling politician who has been very effective in everything he has gone into, be it struggling for democracy in the period of dictatorship in Korea, and in recent years as a member of the National Assembly, as the campaign manager for one of Korea's most successful presidents, President Lee Myung-bak, and previously in the very important role of chairman of the Anti-Corruption and Civil Rights Commission, and now as Minister of Special Affairs. If any of you are wondering what Special Affairs is, I'm told reliably that it really means the President's right-hand man. And so I'm very happy, Minister Lee, to introduce you today, and we look forward to your speech.
Well, today I am very pleased and honored to have this occasion to talk. So thank you, U.S.-Korea Institute SAIS, Don Oberdorf, and Dr. David Abshire, President of the Center for the President of the study of the presidency and Congress for inviting me to speak. Also, I would also like to thank Ambassador Hubbard, and very glad to meet him again here, who has become my very close friend. And I am very pleased to see the panelists today. Bruce Klingner from the Heritage Foundation, and Meredith Broadbent, Dr. Meredith Broadbent from SAIS, and from Dr. from SAIS. And when I was a professor here, he helped me a lot. He is Karl Jackson at SAIS, and I would like to thank all of them to be here. Today, I would like to relatively honestly about the Korean issue. I would be proud of what I should be proud of, and I should be ashamed of what I should be ashamed of. Right now, the various issues that Korea and US are facing, I would like to offer my honest opinions on these. In addition, I would like to talk frankly about the future of Korea. When I visited 2008 at SAIS, I spent about a year doing a lot of research. Back then, I found a lot of thoughts about the Korean future and the future of Northeast Asia and NCPP, and I would like to offer my detailed explanation on these concepts. Next year will mark the 130th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. So it has been 30 years after the two countries formed some relations. Except those 40 years when Korea was under Japanese colonial rule, Korea and the United States have maintained a robust alliance. And also, in 1950, during the Korean War, Korea benefited greatly from the help of the United States and the United Nations, and that has become the foundation of the prosperity of the Korea today. On this point, Korea and Korean people are greatly thankful for the United States. Moreover, the Lee Myung-bak administration has helped the US-ROK alliance prosper and deepen, and now the alliance has become a partnership contributing together to the international community, which I think is deeply meaningful. Right now, the two issues of the ROK-Korea alliances I would like to talk about. First is the KORUS FTA needs to be passed in the United States. The U.S. Congress and Korean National Assembly have some opposing opinions on the FTAs. The U.S. Congress, although it's also from some congressmen, thinks that the KORUS FTA should be passed along with the FTAs with Panama and Colombia in the Congress. At the Korean National Assembly as well, the opposition party and some civic groups are against the KORUS FTA, as a matter of fact. However, these opposing opinions from some people exist, but I still believe that course FTA should pass as soon as possible, if possible within the first half of this year at the two Congresses. That is because not just because of the economic benefits of the FTA, but because that its contribution to the new and future partnership between the countries. And it will strengthen the ROK-US alliance in the future. And we can build more trust in the international community on our alliance through this occasion. So Korean National Assembly and Korean government will tide over these opposing opinions about FTA domestically. We'll keep having dialogues and keep explaining the benefits of the FTA. This is our plan. And I hope that the U.S. Congress will pass the KORUS FTA first, because that will be very, very helpful in Korea for us to pass the KORUS FTA. Although we are facing different situations in each country, but this problem should be handled as the priority matter to resolve the problems regarding the ROK-US alliance. So once again, I'm sincerely hoping for prompt passage of the Korea-US FTA. The second issue is the sharing of the understanding on the North Korean issues between the two countries. That has been the case so far. However, at this point, the inter-Korean relations are facing a new stage. In 1953, when we concluded the Armistice Agreement, North Korea violated 223 times. The Armistice Agreement has been violated. Regardless of the severity of the violation, Korea, for the sake of the peace on the Korean Peninsula, has been looking at these violations very patiently. In this process, Korean young generation even forgot that our country is still divided, and they forgot the significance of the security of the Korean Peninsula. However, last year, we experienced the sinking of Cheonan, taking 46 lives of our naval forces. And before that blood has even dried, North Korea provoked again by shelling Yeonpyeong Island. So some civilians and military soldiers lost their lives. Before that, North Korea shot to death one tourist at Mount Kumgang Resort. Recently, such provocations by North Korea are teaching South Korea and South Korean people that we are running out of our patience. And many young people in Korea actually renewed their sense of security, renewed their sense of our reality, which is divided country, and importance of peace. And they realized that we need power to keep peace on our land. So as one example, the Marine Corps, which is the toughest branch of the military, is enjoying the highest volunteering rate after the sinking of Cheonan. So this one example shows that Korean people are renewing their concept about North Korea. And now they realize that provocations by North Korea are infringing on our rights and peace. So the Korean peace is very important to the Northeast Asia's peace and the world peace. And this, I think, is also shared by the United States. So although this is only some people's opinion, some people tend to rush the inter-Korean dialogue at this juncture. South Korean government is not avoiding or doesn't need to avoid the dialogues with North Korea. However, if the dialogue is furthering the peace, then we are okay with it. But before that, North Korea should apologize for the Yeonpyeong Island incident and sinking of the Cheonan. And they need to be more sincere about how they will go about these issues first. Without these preconditions, although we provided many aid to North Korea under the name of Sunshine Policy, including humanitarian aid and government aid, however, that has not left us anything. So this made us realize that unconditional aid to North Korea does not guarantee peace on the Korean Peninsula. So this precondition, the apology on sinking of Cheonan and shelling on Yeonpyeong Island, and their promise not to provoke again, should come first before resuming talks between two Koreas. And so far, I believe the U.S. is sharing this understanding. This trust between the two countries will bring North Korea back to the dialogue and negotiating table, and this will be very effective means for North Korea. So I hope that the United States will go together or on the same page with the South Korea in terms of North Korean policy. South Korea, after the Second World War for 60 years, has developed and modernized, and it cannot be even compared to any other country in this sense. All those countries, about 120 countries who got liberated from their colonial rule, but they are not all enjoying $20,000 GDP, and they have established robust democracy. Korea is the only example for these miraculous achievements. The personal income of South Korea is over 20,000, and it is ranked as 12th largest economy in the world. Also, last year, South Korea has become the largest, 7th largest exporter in the world. This year, it'll reach about 1 trillion won in terms of trading volume. Last year, we also hosted G20 conference, which was the first case outside of the European country. Also, the Lee Myung-bak administration has successfully coped with the global financial crisis and has recovered fast from these economic crises out of all the OECD member countries. Nevertheless, the current situation that South Korea is facing cannot just be said that it's very bright given the future prospects. Although we have $20,000 personal income, we haven't really joined the ranks of advanced countries who are enjoying $30,000 or $40,000 personal income. Unless we can address this issue, we cannot join the ranks of the advanced countries. Korea actually achieved the democratization and modernization in a pretty short time period. From the ashes of the war in 1950, Koreans were suffering terribly, and the poverty could be solved only through industrialization. And for this purpose, many Korean people provided their efforts. Industrialization, in one word, was to solve poverty, and in the process of solving poverty, we had to experience corruptions, public corruptions, political circles corruption, and business corruptions have taken rooted as some shades or shadows of the industrialization. This is not just the case for South Korea. Except some of the very advanced countries, the corruption issue can be easily seen throughout the world, and this is a very common issue. This corruption issue cannot be solved by the rule or the law, but can only be solved when people change their sentiments or concept. The Korea's corruption issue should not be an obstacle to Korea's development. And this anti-corruption activity is the most important national endeavor. As a former chair of the Corruption and Human Rights Committee, I've created some of the systems. One was that all the public agencies funded by the government should improve their anti-corruption quotient. All the local government, autonomous governments, public schools, etc., had to disclose their anti-corruption quotient, and whoever was ranked the lowest had to go through some problems with their budgets. Also, the federal government and all the public agencies and their public officials will be evaluated by some anti-corruption standard. This is very difficult to evaluate some persons, individuals, on some anti-corruption quotient, but Korean government is trying to boldly do this. Otherwise, we believe that this shadow of industrialization, the corruption issue, will not go away. So the senior public officials, if they are offered some bribes in terms of golf treats, or if they are not handling the complaints from the citizens, these will be evaluated for their performance. And from this year, this will be actually disclosed. However, despite these efforts, the corruption issue, as I said, hinges on the change of people's concept. In the process of industrialization, corruption has already taken root as some sort of culture. So this culture is hard to go away, and everyone knows. However, in the future, Korea is desperate to get rid of this to further develop, because Korea does not have enough natural resources. We're importing 98% of resources, and our grain sustenance is about 25%. Our arable land is very small and mostly it's mountainous. Since Korea is a peninsula, and we don't have the upper half of our country occupied by North Korea, and across the river there's Japan. So we have very small land mass to ourselves. And also we're experiencing this low birth aging problem as well. So if Korea can be guaranteed some bright future, Korea needs to showcase itself as the cleanest society to the world. And this should be the top priority for Korea's national competitiveness.
비교적 민주
Second, Korea has achieved democratization movement in a short period of time. After the government was established in 1948, we had the autocratic government for 12 years. After the government was toppled, that regime was followed by the military regime. After the military regime, due to the coup, the government was back in the hand of the military regime. So we had the military regime for the next 7 years. And then later we finally took the path of the democratization by allowing the constitution that will allow the change of president every 5 years. When I look at the incidents that is happening in the Middle East now, I realize that Korea, by the power of the people, is a country that has achieved democratization with the people's power. But the maturation of the democracy has yet to be fully established. As we held presidential election every 5 years, winners takes all and losers just lose all. And that has created a political conflict. And this political conflict also brings the conflict among ideologies and among regions. And right after the presidential election, this conflict always served as an obstacle for the development of the Korean society. We got corruption as a result of the industrialization, and conflict was brought on as the byproduct of the democratization. The future of Korea cannot be bright if we do not resolve this conflict and the corruption issues. So we need to think about the future of Korea as we have concerns about these issues. Even though we have the national per capita income of $20,000, which is quite high among Asian countries, but there are many countries that are following Korea in a fast pace, like Brazil, Russia, and India, and also China. In order to compete with these countries and to have a competitiveness edge, as we have achieved democratization and industrialization earlier than them, we need to address the corruption and overcome the conflict among people earlier than those countries. Based on this, I have a picture of the future of Korean society. After the Second World War, we lived in the Pacific era, and that brought the peace and prosperity to the Korean peninsula. But in this Pacific era, based on the alliance between Korea and the United States, we need to move toward the Eurasia. In attaining the era of Eurasia, the most important issue that we need to tackle is North Korea's nuclear issue. North Korea's issue has to be addressed not only from the perspective of the ideological differences or political differences. Unification of both South and Korea has to be an asset of Korea, so this issue can be viewed as the perspective of having an asset with a unified Korea. Then what will the unification bring us? The unification itself is not the end. The reason we are desiring that unification, the reason why we condemn North Korea's provocative actions is because we want to usher in a new era with a unified Korea. After 50 or 100 years, the only path for Korea to stand tall in the international arena are two ways. One way is to export the railroad. I proposed Northeast Asia Community for Peace and Prosperity when I was doing research at the SAIS. And also I discussed these issues with professors in China and developed this idea, this concept of Northeast Asia Community for Peace and Prosperity, or NCPP. And also I had some discussions here in Washington and some discussions in Korea and also in China, and I developed this concept. Because of the geopolitical importance of the Northeast Asia, without the peace in the Northeast Asia, there will be no peace in the world. And also, the status of the United States in the international arena will face some difficulties. So based on the alliance between Korea and the United States, I'd like to propose that linking the railways that reaches to the Eurasia. Korea has an express train. From the city of Seoul to Busan, it takes less than 2 hours. Based on this express train, through Seoul, North Korea, Siberia, and Moscow, and these will reach up to the European countries including London. And when this new railway is established, then it will stretch all the way through the European Union. And this is possible by linking the TSR and TKR. The second line is that goes from Seoul through North Korea to China to Central Asia. And you'll finally reach in Spain and Turkey. When these two lines will reach 30,000 kilometers, and the other line is TSAR that will reach to Southeast Asian countries, and then it will extend to the Middle East, and then that will finally reach in the South American countries. And this will reach to 6,000 kilometers. This is the ambition that I am envisioning by exporting the railway from the Korea. When the agreement is made among countries, then it is not the dream that cannot be achieved. And this line will go through the 40 countries and 66 cities. And that means that we are exporting Korean culture and Korean economy to these 40 countries and 66 cities. So we are exporting cities, the identity of Seoul. And this can be achievable within 2 to 3 years with the technology of Korea. And the newly developed towns in Korea can show the possibility of this plan. I believe construction technology of Korea is very advanced. So by exporting the Korean railway to these 40 countries and exporting the identity of Seoul to those 66 cities, that will show the capacity of the Korea's cultural and economic powers. This is the way that we can overcome the small land and small, scarce natural resources. These days, the nation cannot survive when it is limited to its own culture and economic power. As I was studying at SAIS, I thought that English, China, and Spanish, those three languages will survive after 50 or 100 years later. Some scholars used to say this. But so in this regard, for Korea to survive after like 50 or 100 years, the only way is to expand to the Eurasia region. And this will expand our capacity, cultural and economic capacity, and this is the way that we can hand down to our next generation. In order for this to be realized, we need to think why those countries will give us the opportunity to export our railroad. What can be the basis to persuade them to let us build this extended railway? The answer can be because Korea is the only country that has no corruption in government, in business activities. So when they have conviction that if we let Korea do that, and then it will be the complete success. With the technology of Korea, there will be no way that it can fail. So if we let them know that we can do it with the practice that we have, then I think this is the possible scenario. I witnessed the correlations with the anti-corruption and the economic power. The anti-corruption index that was released by the international organization, the level is about the same in 2009 and 2010. There are 23 nations that has national income, per capita income of $30,000. Out of 10 score, those countries graded higher than 7. And the highest score was 9.3. And there are 70 countries that have the per national capita income less than $30,000, and their score is quite low. So what those index show us is that the clean country is advanced nations. and corrupted countries are not advanced nations. And also, political system serves an important role. For those in the advanced countries who has higher score in terms of the anti-corruption index, among those countries, we cannot have the presidential system. The only one-time 5-year term presidential system, I cannot find this case among those countries. And among those countries who showed a low index of the anti-corruption, most of those countries have the presidential system that only allows one-time serving term. That's why we need to change the constitution in Korea. The current system that we have in Korea now is under the situation, the power is too concentrated. And when the power is too concentrated, that brings corruption. As we diffuse the concentrated power, we can enhance the competitiveness of the nation. This shows that the political system of the advanced nation shows that most of those political systems are parliamentary systems. At a time when Korea is about to rank to the ranks of the advanced nations, I believe it is time to change our constitution. And with respect to the reunification, even though there's an uncertainty, I don't believe that the North Korea's regime will sustain that for a long time. So in order for us to prepare for the reunification, we need to come out with a new constitution. And we also need to pursue the decentralization. Unlike the United States, in Korea, we are seeing the conflicts among the regions. To overcome the conflict, we need to come up with a new constitution that reflects the new reality.
So the constitutional reform is very important. So next year we'll go through 2 elections. This year, Korea doesn't really have big political issues. Since we have about 2 years till the election happens, this year is the best time to handle this issue. The election law, election system, party law, constitutions, and all those political reforms should be finished this year. And next year, for 1 year, we will be able to successfully go through 2 big elections. So I believe that constitutional reform should happen this year. This is my personal opinion. So now, I would like to conclude my remarks here. And once again, I would like to thank President Obama and his administration for trust in our nation, and for Korea to become richer and better will be a better way to strengthen ROK-US alliance. And I hope and expect bigger and deeper attention and interest from the United States on South Korea. And I hope that this alliance will keep going strong. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much.
예, 이정관님 감사합니다. 굉장히
Speech. I think we have time for a few questions. Could I ask if there are any comments or questions from the room?
Can I make a quick comment?
Yes, please. Yes, of course.
I study leadership, and there are leaders that attempt to make changes at the small jumps. You, sir, are a transformational leader with vision, and you have a pathway to get there, and I'm deeply inspired. I'm also moved at what you say on corruption. When I left government in 1987, I served for 9 years on the board of Procter & Gamble, and we found that the biggest hindrance to foreign investment was corruption, and getting these young people, what you said about getting these young people with a new code of ethics, and yet the organizations that they go to have to support that, so they're reinforced and are not alone. But I congratulate you on your transformational presentation.
Thank you. Any comments from the room, questions? Please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Yes, sir.
예, 안녕하십니까. 저는 미주 경제
Hi, I'm a reporter from Hanyang, and I would like to offer my question. Since the Lee Myung-bak administration, the government officials are just enjoying too much power and authority amongst this Korean community in here, and I wonder how you're thinking about this. That was a very good question. Under the Lee administration, I've been working as the Special Affairs Minister for about a year. This public official showing off for enjoying too much authority is very rare. However, but some very small number of people saying that they're very close to the president and very close to the Minister of the Special Affairs, but they are not public officials. But since the establishment of Lee Myung-bak administration, there have not been any cases where public officials have had big corruption cases. But there was some cases of corruption at the police chief and Blue House Inspection General's corruption case, etc. However, under the current administration, these corruption cases cannot be avoided. It was there before, it will be there for some time. Because the power is concentrated on the president, you can sell off or name drop the president and you can do anything in Korea. That's why I'm saying this constitutional reform is very important. I wonder that will answer your question. I am studying at the Georgetown Security Study. You mentioned constitutional reform. I deeply agree with your opinion, and I thank you for your opinion. This year and next year, you said this will be the best time for constitutional reform and decentralize the power, but do you have any special plans to materialize this power decentralization? And to do so, I believe that there should be some public consensus and change of people's mind. Do you have any plans or steps to make this happen? Yes, now, if we do survey, about 60% of people believe that constitutional reform is necessary, and about 90% of politicians believe that it's necessary. However, the method of the constitutional reform are mixed among people. People are very interested in this issue, but they don't think it's so real because so far, Korea has gone through 9 times of constitutional reform, and that was just to extend their presidency. And when they were trying to make the presidency possible for 3rd time or 4th time, or after the military coup, they did the constitutional reform so that they can stay there forever at the presidency. But now we are talking about a completely different issue. It will be a very peaceful constitutional reform. The current president is not interested in running again as a president. He is not interested in extending his presidency. He just wants to fix the problem caused by this power concentration. So the people are not really think this is real because they're just going through hardships in terms of their actual day-to-day living, employment, high prices, and everything. Therefore, so the public opinions are not really swaying either way on this issue. So within this year, we need about 60 days to submit the bill about constitutional reform, and then we need about 30 days before we put it up for referendum. However, if opposition and ruling parties can agree, we can do it within 30 days. At the National Assembly, GNP has created some special committee on constitutional reform going through some research, and the opposition party is being requested by us to go conduct some research on this constitutional reform. And I am personally talking a lot about the necessity of this constitutional reform. But however, in reality, some people think that doing this within this year is not going to be possible, but I personally believe that this should be happening today. And the 17th and 18th Assembly already agreed on conducting this reform already. So if we can't do this year, it'll just keep getting pushed off, and we'll never get it done. I hope that'll answer your question. I'm Kim Jin-gu from Radio Free Asia. I would like to ask some question about North Korea. The United Nations and World Food Program decided to provide, is as urgently needed, need to provide some food for North Korea. And I know that they're discussing this issue with South Korean issue. And I would like to know what is the South Korean government's position on this. And you believe that precondition for all these aids is the apology from North Korea on the incidents. So also, do you believe that U.S. government should wait until the apology comes before they provide aid? That was a very good question. We believe that the aid provision to North Korea should wait until North Korea provide their apology on those two incidents. About 70% or more of them are believing that this is the right way to go. And I strongly hope that U.S. will take the same position. If its ally is being provoked by North Korea, and if United States is trusting South Korea as a true ally, I think U.S. government should keep its stance of pressing North Korea for its apology. For food aid, some civic groups can, if they want, provide some humanitarian aid, but the massive government-level food aid will not happen before North Korean apology. Before, we provided cement, cash, and rice and everything under the name of Sunshine Policy to North Korea, but North Korea still did not come to the path for open and reform. So even if we do it now, it is not going to bring about reform and openness from North Korea. And this is what we learned, painfully learned from past. So the massive government-level aid will only be possible when North Korea sincerely offer their apology on those two incidents.
Mr. Lee, for an inspiring speech and excellent answers to some difficult questions. Jay, would you like to bring on the panel at this point? Thank you. I think, can we have another round of applause for Mr. Lee?
Excellent speech.
Thank you.
Excellent.
We'll just take a 10-minute break so that we can get the name tents up here.
Straight down?
You're 2005. 4. Good to see you. And where are you now? Wonderful. Did you ask someone that asked that question? Yeah. And so are you still in the military?
No, it's
Ladies and gentlemen, if you can kindly take your seat, we'll get started in 1 minute.
My wife's mother and father and his sister, her husband, 2 of their 3 kids, 2 of their 3 grandkids.
If you can kindly take your seat, we'll get started. Good afternoon. My name is Jae-oh. I'm the director of the U.S.-Korea Institute at SAIS of Johns Hopkins University. I want to thank President David Abshire of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress for co-hosting this event. I was telling him earlier that, and I won't mention what year, but many years ago, I was an intern at the Center for Strategic International Studies when he was the president of that organization. He is a giant in the field of national security and foreign policy, and I'd forgotten how tall he really is. I think we had a terrific discussion on Korea, the linking of Korea's domestic politics and foreign policy, and the ongoing deepening of our 2 countries' alliance, and what that means for South Korea, and what South Korean political leaders hope to do in the next few years to continue deepening that relationship, but also making South Korea that much more advanced economically and politically. I'm very pleased to moderate this panel. I won't go in detail the bios of the speakers, but briefly I'll go in the order of speakers. From my left, Professor Karl Jackson is the Director of Asian Studies and Southeast Asia Studies at SAIS. He has spent a couple of decades as professor at Berkeley. He has held some senior positions in the U.S. government, including a Special Assistant to the President, Senior Director for Asia on the National Security Council, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and recently he had been advisor to the President of the World Bank and Executive Vice President of the International Finance Corporation. But most importantly, he was my PhD advisor.
I failed.
On Professor Jackson's left is Bruce Klingner, who I've known for many years. He's currently the Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation. Before joining Heritage, he's had a distinguished career in the U.S. intelligence community. In the 90s, he was the chief of the CIA's Korea branch, providing analytic reports on the military developments in North Korea during the nuclear crisis. He had been the deputy chief of Korea and the CIA's director of intelligence. And we often joke about in this town how that's an oxymoron, but he really is part of the intelligent part of the intelligence community. And he's had private sector experience as well, having worked at the Eurasia Group and also as a senior Asia analyst at the IntelliBridge Corp. Down at the end of the table is Meredith Broadbent, who is a senior advisor and holds the William M. Scholl Chair in International Business at CSIS. Prior to joining CSIS, she was the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Industry, Market Access, and Telecommunications. She also has extensive Hill experience, serving as senior professional staff member for the House Ways and Means Committee. And I realize the 2 of you went to college. Same.
We just found that out.
Okay, very good. So on that note, let me start with you, Professor Jackson.
Let me not turn over the glass. Thank you very much, Jay. Jay has told me I have a simple assignment. Just talk about the past, the present, and the future of Asia, but you have 3 minutes, right? Well, I'm going to say just a few words about Japan. I'm going to say almost nothing about Korea because I'm leaving that to my two colleagues. I will say a few words about the United States and a few words about China. First of all, Jae and I were just in Asia for 2 weeks, in Beijing, and then in Seoul, and then in Tokyo just before the tsunami, and then eventually in Bangkok. So I thought I would pass along at least my impressions of what was going on a couple of weeks ago out in Asia. First of all, beginning with Japan, Japan is down, but Japan is not out. It will survive the problems created by the tsunami and by the earthquake. Japan's primary problems are not the tsunami. They're not the earthquake. They are not even the Japanese economy. I would contend the primary problems of Japan are its government. When you consider that most prime ministers last for a year, it is almost inconceivable to me how one could ever run a coherent government with a new prime minister almost every year. Japan is still strong economically. It may be only the third largest economy in the world, but it is the third largest economy with a very small population and a very generous GDP per capita per annum that can play a role in the foreign policy of the world. The U.S.-Japan alliance, some people would say, is it still as strong as it once was? The answer is no, it's not as strong as it once was, it's stronger than it used to be. And part of that is as a result of this terrible tragedy that happened, the tsunami and the earthquake. The United States and Japan have been behaving in response to a natural disaster in the way that allies should and must behave. The aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan was on site the first day after the quake. It served as the only landing field in the most tragically impacted area. I've seen two figures. I don't know which of them is true. Either 12,000 sailors and Marines were working around the clock, or it was 18,000 sailors and Marines helping the more than 100,000 members of the Japanese self-defense forces. This is a response to a tragedy. And what's interesting is Korea. Let's not mince words here. The relationships between Korea and Japan have been fraught with negativism for at least 150 to 200 years. And yet when this tragedy took place, the Republic of Korea also stepped in. It provided money. It provided help of all kinds. And this is how an alliance fits together. Perhaps the most striking impression I came away from my trip through Asia this time, what I came away with was a sense that there's change taking place between Korea and Japan. There will continue to be animosities generated by textbook controversies, et cetera. But for the first time in my memory, at least, Japan and Korea are coming closer together, not just in a military fashion, but in the coordination of policies in other areas. I never thought I would live that long as to see that. I tried to bring that about from when I was working in the White House and the Defense Department in the later 80s and early 90s. I failed entirely. But the combination of the poor behavior, the irresponsible behavior of North Korea, and the vanishing act that Chinese soft diplomacy seems to have done in the last 18 months has made the unexpected reality that is the kind of tough Chinese behavior over a variety of issues combined with the irresponsible behaviors of North Korea have tended to drive Japan and Korea into one another's arms. Now, what about the United States? First of all, it seems to me the United States is at a crossroads. We inevitably will need to begin husbanding our resources. This will mean, inevitably, that there will be more dependence on our allies than in the past. The unipolar moment, in my opinion, if it ever existed, is over. The United States will have to depend more on Korea, more on Japan, and more on its other allies in the world, while simultaneously, and I mean simultaneously, trying to bring to the head table of the international system the new rising powers, both China and India. There will be a need to make choices. The U.S. defense budget is going to go down in real terms. And this will require that we depend more, not less, on our allies, but it will also require that we simultaneously depend on our diplomacy to try to usher to the head table of international relations both of these two major rising powers. The international system usually fails to do this, and warfare usually takes place. It is the responsibility of the next generation of foreign policymakers in this town to do better than previous generations have done and accomplish this difficult event. Now that brings me to just a couple of remarks about China. I continue to be not a lone voice, but certainly a minority voice in this town because I do not support the China can do no wrong thesis. And I also, in the 1980s, resisted the thesis that Japan was going to take over the world. Basically, I tend to think that China is a rising power. China will be more assertive. China will have more power, more military power, and more economic power. And it is the responsibility of the United States to do everything it can to channel those powers in a positive direction while simultaneously maintaining an alliance system so that if, even after our best efforts, the game doesn't come out the way we want it to, we will have the capacity to restrain any negative aspects that may come out of the changing power constellation in Asia. I promised to say virtually nothing about Korea because of the two panelists who will follow me, but I can't resist at least one remark. That is, it is past time, long past time for the U.S.-Korea FTA to be passed by the Congress of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank both the U.S.-Korea Institute at SAIS and the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress for the opportunity. I'll be focusing on the U.S.-Korean alliance, so I have an easier assignment than Karl. The alliance has been indispensable. It has deterred North Korean attacks. It has really been the shield which behind South Korea was able to develop its economic strength, to institutionalize democratic rule, and become the miracle on the Han River that we all know. and it also was indispensable in maintaining peace and stability in Asia. And right now, the alliance is exceptionally strong. Alliance managers say they cannot think of a time when it was a better condition. And it's not only at the military-to-military level where things usually are the strongest and where things work the best, but also at the alliance manager level, and most importantly, at a very strong personal relationship between President Lee Myung-bak and both President Bush and now President Obama. That is very important. And there are several reasons for this. The first, I think the most important, is the underlying cause. And that's that the two countries, we share common values and principles. There's the long-standing history of working together and shared objectives. And indeed, as has been often noted, this is an alliance forged in blood. And you know, all of these factors form the bedrock of a very strong alliance, but it's not enough because, as we've seen in the past, there have been strains. So the second factor is President Lee Myung-bak. It's a significant improvement in the alliance after the transition from Roh Moo-hyun to Lee Myung-bak. Even before his inauguration, President Lee announced that his primary foreign policy goal was to repair the alliance. So we saw very quickly a dramatic improvement in the mood in Washington and the attitude towards the Republic of Korea. There were many actions and comments by President Roh during his term that raised questions and indeed concerns in Washington. During his campaign, President Roh had asked publicly, what's wrong with being anti-American? And that really set a tone of concern in Washington. And also, there were any number of issues, strategic flexibility, Con Plan 5029, et cetera, that there were disagreements, but also the very strong differences between the two governments on policy towards North Korea. After he left office, Roh Moo-hyun gave an interview in 2008 where he said, at the six-party talks, we supported the North Korean position as much as we could. At international conferences, when remarks critical of North Korea arose, we argued for North Korea with as much logic as we could. We avoided as much as we could statements provoking North Korea. Sometimes we had to endure even if our pride was hurt. These are not the kind of comments one normally likes to hear from an ally. I'd say the third factor is President Barack Obama. He has maintained the long-standing U.S. policy of recognizing the importance of strong alliances in Northeast Asia with not only the Republic of Korea but Japan. And when he first entered office, there was the potential for strains between the U.S. and the Republic of Korea over North Korean policy because he was going to pursue a very aggressive diplomatic outreach to North Korea, even during the campaign promising to consider an unconditional summit with Kim Jong-il. Now, this would have put the United States and South Korea at odds with each other over policy. However, once North Korea engaged in a series of provocations in early 2009, including threats of war against the United States and its allies and nuclear tests, missile tests, et cetera, the Obama administration quite correctly, in my view, reversed its policy 180 degrees and adopted the two-track policy that we see today. So right now, you have the Obama administration having brought its North Korea policy more in line with that of Lee Myung-bak, and therefore reducing any differences between the two governments over North Korean policy. So now the U.S. and South Korea have a common vision, a common threat assessment, as well as a common approach towards North Korea. Another factor is North Korean actions during the past 2 years. The 2009 provocations and then more recently the brutal attacks on the Cheonan and Yeongpyeong-do made the need for strong alliances in Northeast Asia blatantly obvious. These acts, along with an increasingly assertive China, have certainly demonstrated not only the dangers that are inherent in Asia, but also the need for the U.S. to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies, the Republic of Korea and Japan. And yet, even after these blatant attacks, South Korea is not united in its viewpoint towards North Korea. Indeed, progressives in South Korea denied North Korea's involvement in the sinking of the Cheonan, despite the clear, comprehensive, and compelling evidence that a five-nation investigative team prepared after extensive research. And some even claim that the United States Navy was the one that sank the Cheonan. But their arguments really rang increasingly hollow after the attack on Yeongpyeong-do, when North Korea's complicity could no longer be denied. But even now, we have some DP opposition members who continue to blame the hardline policies of South Korea for North Korea's unprovoked acts of war, which killed 50 of their countrymen. Now, the alliance is quite strong, but the U.S. and South Korea cannot rest on our laurels because an alliance, like a marriage, requires constant work. So what are some of the challenges that face us in the next year or so? Well, certainly the North Korean threat is most prevalent. And it is, of course, a multifaceted threat. Not only the nuclear program, and we have two parallel uranium and plutonium-based weapons programs that we must address, and any doubts about North Korea's pursuit of a uranium program certainly were cast aside after the disclosure to a visiting U.S. professor and scientist in November of last year. Also, there's the missile threat. There's the existing threat of 1,000 missiles which can target South Korea, Japan, as well as U.S. bases in Guam and Okinawa. And as Secretary of Defense Gates recently commented, that North Korea is becoming a direct threat to the United States since they are expected to have an ICBM within the next 5 years. Also, the conventional forces threat. As the attacks on the Cheonan and Yongpyeong-do made very clear, we cannot ignore the North Korean conventional forces threat. And also, we can very much, I think, expect to see further additions or further provocations in 2011 because North Korea has not yet attained its foreign policy objectives. Another challenge is the increasingly assertive behavior and policies of China. The incident in the Senkakus reverberated throughout Asia. Senior officials in Seoul said that it raised great concern in Seoul because they see South Korea as even more susceptible to Chinese pressure than Japan. Even on such issues as rare earth mineral exports, they see themselves as much more susceptible to Chinese pressure. And they also emphasized that concern and the heavy reliance on South Korea's economy, on China's economy, made clear the need for diversifying South Korea's economy away from an over-reliance on China through, let's say if we had a free trade agreement between the United States and South Korea. So that's one of many geostrategic benefits that the free trade agreement would have for both our countries. Also, China's behavior in the West Sea, where they were more critical of the U.S. and South Korean response to the Cheonan attack than the attack itself. And after North Korea's nuclear tests in 2006 and 2009, China had grudgingly done the right thing. They had agreed to sort of watered down, but nonetheless, UN resolutions against North Korea. So I had been somewhat hopeful that they couldn't ignore the facts of Cheonan and Yongpyeong-do and, of course, would do the right thing. That, unfortunately, was not the case, and they continue to be obstructionist in the UN Security Council. Another issue is South Korean military reform. We've seen with the Defense Reform Plan of 2020, which has now been superseded by another plan, sort of continuing questions as to the future of South Korean defense reform. Seoul has been underfunding its defense requirements for a number of years, and now we have obviously additional problems that were exposed by shortcomings by the military during the Cheonan and Yongpyeong-do. And also there's a need for a comprehensive integrated missile defense system to combat the North Korean missile threat to South Korea. So we're going to have to carefully watch the future of this new, what's now being called the 307 plan to replace DRP 2020. And also another issue is transforming the current military relationship into a strategic alliance. A lot's been talked about for years, but we're still really at a point where we have more questions than answers. It's been, I think, very slow in the last several years as to actually implementing the transformation. And during my visit to Seoul next week, I'm meeting with U.S. and Korean officials to learn more about what the current status and plans are for transforming the alliance. Karl raised the issue of that the U.S. is going to have more constrained defense spending, but that also raises a question of who will lean on who. You know, we would hope we could lean more on our allies as we face greater constraints on our defense spending, but also now I think you'll see South Korea becoming a bit more insular in its defense focus given the attacks of last year. And then also Japan will now be having to focus even more of its resources to sort of internal requirements to overcome the disaster, and will be even more reluctant to increase an already underfunded defense budget. And then finally, the 2020 election. And not in the United States, because I think whoever is elected the next president or re-elected from whatever party, there really will be no difference in the U.S. policy towards South Korea. The support for our ally has been long-standing and bipartisan. So I don't have any concern really from a U.S. side over the future of the relationship. However, the two elections in South Korea in April and December of next year very well could bring about a change in leadership that is far less friendly or supportive of the alliance and the relationship with the United States. So in conclusion, I'd say that U.S. security objectives, as well as the best interests of the region, have been and will continue to be best served by strong and enduring bilateral relations between the U.S. and its allies, but also by increasing and strengthening the trilateral relations between South Korea, Japan, and the United States. We hope that because our nations share common principles and values, and we've seen the very strong response by both the United States and South Korea toward the tragedy in Japan, that this may serve as a basis for reducing some of the mistrust in Northeast Asia, as well as hopefully improving the trilateral relationship on the military side. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Meredith?
Thank you, Jay. I want to thank the U.S. Korea Institute and the Center for the Study of Presidency and Congress for having us here today. This has been a really fascinating panel for me to listen to. My responsibility here is just to deal with the channel of U.S. trade relations with Korea, bilateral trade relations. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a few significant dates in the history of bilateral trade relations between Korea and the U.S., talk a little bit about the impasse that we're seeing in Congress right now, which I believe is temporary, and then what the future might hold on our ability to cooperate with the Koreans on the international trade agenda going forward. The title of this panel, Leadership Matters, is really true. U.S. leadership really matters for the international trading system, I believe. And passing this U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement will really be a litmus test and square one for implementing a broader U.S. strategy of re-engaging in Asia. So what we're talking about here is really critical to our ability to be in the forefront of the trading system once again. Looking back over U.S.-Korea trade relations, just a few significant dates. Korea joined the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade in 1967, the forerunner to the WTO. It adopted trade as part of its engine for economic growth. The total volume of trade in the Korean economy was 60% in 1970. Bilateral trade between the U.S. and Korea started out as $232 million in 1962, was $10.5 billion by 1981, and had grown to $26 billion in 1987. As the U.S. trade deficit grew, we had a lot of bilateral confrontations with Korea. Congress became more protectionist. Members passed what we called a Super 301, which was sort of a naming and shaming confrontation mechanism with Korea. And we took on these big high-profile cases on autos and later steel and semiconductors, disputes over the dumping law. It was a rocky road and a lot of distrust on both sides, which, looking back, you really realize sort of how healthy the bilateral relationship is now. 1999, Senator Baucus, chairman of the Finance Committee, introduced the first bill to authorize a free trade agreement negotiation with Korea. And there were numerous Republican bills in the House identical to that. So it's going back till 1999. When members were first, putting out their markers that they thought this was an important goal to pursue. In 2003, China surpassed the United States as South Korea's #1 export market. We signed the FTA agreement in 2007 and then the supplemental agreement in 2010. And at this point, the bilateral trade volume back and forth was $70 billion. It's huge. It's really strong, essential to both of our economies. We've come a long way together. Unfortunately, the conclusion of the FTA has come at a really turbulent time in domestic relations here between Congress and the President. And this goes to really a deeply felt constitutional issue, which is our split authorities to regulate international trade that is shared between Congress and the President. And as either one wants to move forward, it's difficult unless there's a forged idea, a consensus of the direction to go. And it's not just hurting the Korea agreement, it's hurting every other trade issue that Congress has tried to tackle in the last 5 years, including trade preference programs have expired for very poor countries like Egypt, at a very difficult time, developing country trade benefits. We aren't able to do domestic programs like expanding trade adjustment assistance. We can't pass miscellaneous tariff bills, which are just small duty reductions for our companies. Everything has really come to a halt in this area of trade policy. And as we work our way through it, it's going to be a very important breakthrough, but it's going to be a little uncomfortable here, I think, for the next month or so until Congress and the President kind of get their signals on the same page. The important thing is that the benefits of the free trade agreement sell themselves, and really it's a vision that's sort of guiding us through this impasse. Everyone wants to get the Korea FTA done, and they want to do it as soon as possible. And that's where the system is working as I see it, and I see members on both sides of the aisle in Congress and the President working very, very hard to get this agreement worked out between the two branches of government. As we go forward and looking forward after the free trade agreement is passed, which I believe will be this year and be shortly, I think Korea and the United States have really a shared responsibility to take the trading system forward. We're seeing a big impasse in the Geneva negotiations and the multilateral negotiations. Korea and the United States have always been strong allies in pushing market-oriented proposals and services and industrial tariffs and telecommunications, all areas where we've been able to come to a common understanding and then lead the trading system. And I think this will be a strength of the international economic system in the future. It will allow something that I think is important, that Korea take a role in the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiation, which is ongoing and which the U.S. needs to participate in actively. We've been constrained because of our lack of understanding between Congress and the President. We've been sitting at the table, but there needs to be more negotiating authority behind the U.S. presence there. And that's something that we can look forward to in the future. I know the Koreans have not said they're interested in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Initiative, but it makes an awful lot of sense as we look forward in Asia and how we want our trade relations organized. There's the G20, the new international economic policy organ, where both countries have a strong role to play and where we can coordinate on currency matters and other things that are destabilizing the international economy. At a time when oil prices are high, we've had a financial crisis, lots of turbulence in Japan, it's important that these underlying structures of the system work in a healthy manner. And I think we're very, very lucky that we have such a good trade agreement that is really leading the way. And as Congress debates these things during the next month, I think you'll see some progress and an ability for both Korea and the United States to be more active, both together, and for the U.S. to be more active in Asia.
Well, thank you very much. I think this was a terrific and comprehensive overview of the current U.S.-Korea relations and U.S.-Asia relations. I think as we talk about the alliance relationship, that really is now becoming a more and more of a two-way street. We have President Afshar, I just heard earlier, who's really the living embodiment of that relationship, where he is a veteran of the Korean War. My chairman, Don Oberdorfer, having graduated from Princeton, going through basic training, commissioned as a second lieutenant, gets on a boat, shipped to go fight in the Korean War. He lands on the peninsula, and the war is over, and he spends time on the
Timing is
spends time on the DMZ, thereby beginning his long relationship with Korea as the diplomatic correspondent for many years with the Washington Post. I think too often in this town, people forget that Korea is out there as an ally of the United States. We know in the 60s, Korea had rotated some 350,000 soldiers during the Vietnam War. In the Second Gulf War, over 20,000 Korean soldiers served in Iraq. And we presently have, I think, about 350 South Korean soldiers serving in Afghanistan. And I think that really does say a lot about the alliance relationship, that it is not simply about one-way street in which which Korea is the recipient. It's a much more mature relationship, as this FTA discussion is really about. It's really about the future of both countries. And I think we had a terrific overview, and I want to open it up for questions from the audience. We have a microphone here, so if you can please raise your hand and identify yourself. Not everyone at once. Over here.
Hi, my name is Lee Nelson. I have a question regarding the U.S. reposturing of forces in Korea. As we move forces further away from the DMZ, do you see any correlation in that force movement and the increased provocations from North Korea with the Chonan and Yangpyeong Island incidents?
I don't think there really is a correlation on our distance from the DMZ and North Korean actions. One, because the U.S. is still in Yongsan Army Base, and we're still in Seoul. We haven't yet moved down to Pyeongtaek. And also, more importantly, North Korea has always acted like this. I mean, we've, any number of severe provocations over the years, 1968 and the axe murder and 83 and 87 bombings, et cetera. But there has just always been this pushing the envelope of acceptable behavior by North Korea. So I don't think really there's a correlation, between our movement further from the Z and their behavior.
But I would like to add that there is a perception in Korea that with the redeployment of U.S. troops has some negative security impact. And this actually came about in a lunch discussion in our Seoul trip with a senior political leader who we think will be seeking higher office in the 2012 election. And what struck us in that discussion was this perception that it was kind of like replaying the 1950s, and if it'll take so many days and weeks for U.S. troops to come from mainland. If you can kind of address that concern.
There's often been a conflicting fears in South Korea of abandonment or entanglement. And so we actually saw both at the same time when Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld announced in 2003 that the U.S. would sort of accept South Korea's desire and request and move out of Seoul, out of the Yongsan Army Base. At the time, we saw fears expressed often by the same politicians that, on the one hand, by having the U.S. move further south, it was sort of a prelude to us bugging out entirely. That it was, if we move out of Seoul, it's just one step closer to us moving off the peninsula, abandoning South Korea to face the North Korean threat by themselves. At the same time, there were concerns that the U.S. was moving its troops south to get them out of harm's way as a prelude to a unilateral preemptive U.S. attack on North Korea. So, it was sort of seeming like, well, pick one or the other. But there is that concern anytime there is a drawdown announced in U.S. forces. When we went from 38,000 to 28,000 recently, that was also cause for concern. And we also saw it with the OPCON issue, is that, again, sort of long-standing plans have been to transfer wartime operational command back to South Korean forces. But again, there was that fear that it would sort of unzipper the alliance and that it would allow the U.S. to not respond to an attack by North Korea. I think the U.S. has to do whatever we can to repeatedly reassure South Korea that we are there, not only because we are bound by a treaty to defend them, but it's the right thing to do. So I think, you know, and that is a reason why I think we need to keep such a sizable contingent of U.S. forces, not just air and Navy, as some would advocate, but I think a sizable ground contingent there as a reassurance to our ally as well as a deterrent to North Korea.
Another question. Over here and then there.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Karl. Wang Yu from China's Strategic Magazine, and my question is about the trade issues. So what's the final objectives for promoting the TPP? Would this be a part of re-engaging Asia? And how's the feedbacks from the trading partners, especially South Korea and Japan? Thanks.
Wait, the feedback from?
Trading partners. Trading partners. Yeah,
got it.
thanks.
Yeah. Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is, I think, 9 countries at this point that are negotiating in the Asian region, which the U.S. has joined 2 years ago, I guess. It is should be sort of is being billed as a 21st century trade agreement. We're going to maybe consolidate some free trade agreements that have already in existence among the partners that are a member of this group. Lots of opportunity there. Japan is not a member, but we understand that Japan has been thinking very, very seriously about requesting to join this group. The group includes Australia, New Zealand, and the U.S. Vietnam has indicated they're interested. Korea has not at this point. I think it's pretty understandable that they would like to see us implement the free trade agreement before we start talking about further agreements. And I think that's probably a common perception by all members of this negotiation. You can talk and kind of discuss issues, but it's hard to imagine that countries will make difficult political concessions that they'll have to make if they don't have some indication and some assurance that these agreements will ultimately be able to be implemented, particularly by the U.S., which has the split authorities and our difficulties in going forward on trade. I mean, another issue there, of course, is Trade Negotiating Authority, which expired in this country in 2002. It was in place for the Korea Agreement, and we'll cover that, but is not the Trans-Pacific Partnership is any agreement that would result from that. It really has no negotiating objectives that have been agreed to by the United States or no implementing procedures. So in some respects, the U.S. executive branch is negotiating, but the links with what Congress's intent are a little more tenuous. I mean, they keep in good touch with Congress. They discuss what the priorities are, but they don't have the negotiating objectives that are actually forged by the crucible of the legislative process, where the trade-offs have to be made and priorities have to be identified. So I think one piece of what we want to have happen with the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the U.S. passes the Korea bill. It's a strong signal, and then the U.S. goes on to discuss negotiating authority in a way to give some more negotiating leverage to their negotiators. We would like to see Korea join as well as Japan. I think, at least I personally would. I think the U.S. government is considering that. There's an awful lot to recommend both of those economies because they're so big and they offer so much economic opportunity. We don't have free trade agreements with them now, so we'll get the Korea one, and then it would be easy for Korea to probably dock onto the Trans-Pacific Partnership would be my sense. But this is all vague, and it really, we've got to get over the hurdle of getting the Korea FTA implemented, and then the future can become a little bit clearer on what the opportunities are.
I saw a hand up going this way. Okay.
Yes, Karl from Seagull Center. I have 2 questions. First, South Korea. I wonder how you perceive the motive of North Korea. You regard it as, for all those instances, you regard they are just seeking their security, or they, because of out of insecurity, so they have that kind of behavior. And how the states, how the United States perceive the perception, I just follow up that, the perception, how the US perceive North Korea. And based on that, how you assess the posture of North Korea. You think if that regime can distinguish what's defensive, what's offensive, or they believe that they will have advantage over some offensive posture.
Bruce?
Let me take a crack. I think there are a number, if I understood your question correctly, sir, I think there are a number of objectives that North Korea has that are driving both its provocations and its periodic charm offensive. And experts here and in Seoul and Tokyo will all debate the different ones. I think primarily it is engaged in its own two-track policy in order to, on the northern limit line, there's some tactical objectives there to raise into question the legitimacy of that, the NLL, the maritime border, call into question the sovereignty there, the ability of South Korea to respond to threats in its own waters. But more broadly, they're the long-standing foreign policy objectives of attaining diplomatic and economic concessions, to be recognized as a nuclear weapons state, and a host of other ones. The U.S., there has, within expert community here, there has been a long-standing debate over, was North Korea building the nuclear weapons program as a military capability or as a bargaining chip? And we had great heated debates over that. But I think after North Korea so blatantly bit the open hand of dialogue that President Obama was extending in 2009, it really brought about a sea change, not only in the U.S. government policy of the administration, but also amongst almost all experts. So that now there's great pessimism that North Korea will ever give up its nuclear weapons, that it's we no longer have the debate of what's the magic combination of benefits that will induce North Korea to give up the weapons. Now there's great pessimism that the six-party talks would work or that diplomatic outreach will work. So I think the perception within the U.S. about North Korea has changed dramatically. And right now what we have is strategic patience, but I think really the policy is one of sort of strategic indecision. We have, I think a two-track policy is good, but it's been weakly implemented. And I think what we need to do is increase the power to all cylinders and increase both the pain and the potential gain for North Korea. So we need to have, for example, stronger sanctions targeting the other end of the proliferation pipeline, et cetera. But also we can have engagement with North Korea as long as it's done in a conditional manner with reciprocity and transparency. So hopefully that answered the question.
Could I ask,
yes, sir.
Bruce, I guess it's you, but anybody else, sort of the big question. I understand that the great leaders, billions, are in Chinese banks. They have a degree of controlling power. We're dealing with an irrational leader. And they've got the concern. They don't want North Korea to collapse. We've got the concern. The present leaders are creating a devastating situation in North Korea that is conducive at some point to instability. So in a way, what they're doing, it would seem to me, is not even in their own self-interest. Now, in the power game in the Pacific, it seemed to me that they want to keep us, be our friend, keep us dangling, our friend, keep us dangling. This is a perfect way of doing it. But that, to me, of course, they've got a certain amount of influence on Iran, which they will not exert either. But what's your take on that and in other words, the Chinese strategy? They've got the long view supposedly, and what's their what's their long view on this other to keep us a little off balance?
Right. It has been extremely frustrating for the United States to deal with China over not only North Korea, but Iran and other issues. I think China has far less influence over North Korea than many presume. It has tried to get North Korea to implement Chinese-style economic reform, has failed, tried to prevent them to doing the 2 nuclear weapons programs. I think certainly tried to get them to not do the nuke and missile tests in 06 and 09 and failed throughout all those objectives. So I think it has less influence and is also unwilling to use what little influence it has. Beijing and Washington have different priorities over Pyongyang. Clearly, we want to have a strong denuclearization. We want abidement by the international rules of behavior. China really wants to kick the can down the road. They don't want a crisis on their border, and what the U.S. has been trying to do more recently is point out to Beijing that it's in their own self-interest to exert some pressure on Pyongyang because by acquiescing to North Korean behavior, it is bringing about a situation that is not in Beijing's interest. Not only North Korea's actions are bringing the region closer to a crisis, but also the U.S. and South Korea are having to respond more firmly to those provocations, such as the Cheonan and Yangpyeong-do, so that we are increasing military presence, we're engaging in exercises in the West Sea, et cetera, that China doesn't see in its own interest. So I think Washington has been trying to make that more clear to China that by allowing North Korea to continue on this path, it's bringing about the very situation that China is trying to avoid. I don't think we've been successful very much on that, unfortunately. And also, when the U.S. has tried to engage in contingency discussions with China, they've refused. Not only on a government level, but even on a Track 2 level. China does not want to talk about the potential of North Korean collapse. So therefore, we have great uncertainty as to what China's actions would be in a crisis, what the triggering point for Chinese intervention or actions short of that. So that uncertainty about China's behavior is also raising greater uncertainty and concern about in Washington about China's likely behavior.
If I could just chip in here, it seems to me, and it's one of the things I took away from our last trip to Beijing, is that they don't really spend much time even pretending in Track 2 conversations that they will be terribly cooperative with regard to North Korea. They don't even make a pretense anymore. They used to a couple of years ago. But I think that what this reflects is China's view that if they had to choose between instability in North Korea and a nuclear-armed North Korea, if those were the only 2 choices, they would choose to allow nuclear weapons there if that was the only way of preventing chaos and collapse. It's obviously a false choice, but it is, I think, their choice.
And I would also add, we've made several trips to China in the past 2 years, and there's been that remarkable shift where they've explicitly said we have differences in priorities. Yes, denuclearization is a priority, but it's not our immediate priority. In our trips, a couple of issues come into mind, and one is the kind of the party line, the state line view that North Korea's political transition is going to be smooth. And if you're a Chinese expert talking to Americans or visitors, that's the line that they give. And while we were there recently, the public sentencing of a Chinese scholar 2 years ago who had met, I believe, either a Korean or a Japanese journalist, spoke about the North Korean political leadership. He was under house arrest. And that happened in our first trip to Beijing 2 winters ago, and thus, about a month ago when we were in Beijing again. That's when the 15-year sentence came in. So there is a clear message by the Beijing authorities for its experts, whether in the universities or government, to not talk about North Korea in a way that would speak of destabilization. They don't want to talk about coordination. They want to give a united front in saying that the political transition is going to be smooth. And not only that, we're not sure if the Chinese experts of North Korea really believe that, or if they are forced to say that, or if they buy into that argument. But in our recent trip, the foreign ministry's think tank's leading North Korea expert talked about how things were improving in North Korea.
Yes.
And the American delegation had to chuckle and interject and said, you know, bullocks. And yet, you know, she continued to speak about how things are improving in North Korea. So you know.
Because there are some cell phones.
But,
no food, but cell phones.
But you know, the gentleman asked about, and Bruce replied about, you know, the charm offensives, and we may be seeing another round of charm offensives coming out of North Korea. There was a recent high-level delegation that met in Berlin from North Korea. There's another delegation coming out of North Korea to Stockholm that I'm going to be participating next month. So what we haven't seen for the last 6 months, North Korean delegations coming out and meeting in various European capitals, is now happening again. And we may be seeing more of that, and it would be interesting to see what they are bringing out, what they're saying. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Maybe just add something. You know, the thing is with North Korea and their charm offensive, it tends to be more offensive than charming. And the analogy I think of with sort of the differing U.S. and Chinese priorities towards North Korea is, you know, if I think of North Korea as sort of the troubled teenager with a long history of violent behavior and affinity for handguns, you know, China's sort of the nervous parent who lives with them. And the U.S. is like the policeman or the social worker who comes knocking on the door saying, hey, your son has acted up, he's broken the rules, you know, you need to go down the hall and punish him. And China's kind of like, I live with the kid. You know, I go to sleep at night, I'm not quite sure what he's going to do if I punish him, so why can't we just be a little bit more flexible in applying the rules? So why can't, you know, the U.S. be a little more flexible? Can't we bend the rules one more time? You know, and it's just, you know, that very different priority of, you know, addressing the situation when North Korea breaks the rules yet again.
Final question, Larry.
I'm Larry Nix from CSIS and George Washington University. In the last few months, there have been a number of statements by U.S. and South Korean officials about the prospect that in the near future, North Korea may succeed in developing a nuclear warhead that can be mounted on its missiles. And there is, I think, a lot of convincing evidence and reports that North Korea and Iran are jointly working to develop a nuclear warhead that can be mounted on their common Nodong Shahab missile. Now, if this speculation, and perhaps that's the best word to use right now, turns out to be true in the near future, perhaps in 2012, that big year that the North Koreans have proclaimed, if they succeed in mounting nuclear warheads on their missiles and have a real delivery system to constitute a physical threat against our allies in Northeast Asia, what effect will this have on the defense policies of our allies and their expectations of the United States? To Karl, would this break Japan out of the shackles of Article 9 with regard to Japanese defense spending, the limitations on what the military can do, or will Article 9 remain a kind of unbreakable chain around Japan's neck? And to Bruce, would this lead to South Korea perhaps moving more seriously into a debate about developing a nuclear weapons capability of its own or making new demands on the United States. And there are already advocates in South Korea that the United States should bring back tactical nuclear weapons into South Korea. So what kind of effect would this kind of strategic breakthrough that North Korea might well achieve in the very near future have on the defense policies of our allies and their expectations of the United States?
What a softball question. Well, if one assumes the negative contingency you talked about, Larry, it seems to me the first thing that happens is North Korea becomes the #1 target of the entire United States missile force. And we move into a position where deterrence is dealt with in the style it was dealt with during the Cold War. That is, to repeatedly reassure the leadership of North Korea that if they ever let one of those things off, they've got 19 more minutes to live. All of them. It'll be that brutal. Now, what will the impact be on Article 9, Japanese defense spending, et cetera? I would assume there would be some increase in Japanese defense spending, particularly with regard to missile defense, and that would further tighten the U.S.-Japan defense alliance, and it would also drive Japan and the Republic of Korea closer and closer together. I mean, I don't see how acquiring a weapon with a small number of these weapons actually increases the security of North Korea. I think it would decrease the security in any real sense. Now, it still gives North Korea the ability to threaten, to be bellicose, et cetera, but after all, the Soviet Union spent an entire career doing that, and we were able to deter the Soviet Union. If you assume that North Korea is run by vintage lunatics, then you have a problem, but I do not see that. I think that, if anything, the leadership is quite sophisticated in pushing just far enough and pulling back. If I were giving the North advice about playing footsie with the Iranians, I would say don't.
I think the results will be contradictory. For some, it would be a great paradigm changer, and for others, it would be no change. And by that, I mean, right now, when Secretary Gates in January said North Korea is becoming a direct threat, it'll have an ICBM in 5 years, there was this huge hullabaloo in the media of, sort of this, my God, why wasn't I informed? And, as an old Intel guy who worked on the 2001 NIE on missile threats, it's like, we've been telling you for any number of years. So what, again, as an Intel guy whining, what we often find is people dismissive of North Korean threats when it's just, oh, that's what U.S. Intel says, and they always get it wrong. And then when it becomes, undeniably, obvious, such as when Dr. Hecker is shown the 2000 centrifuges, then the same people who denied U.S. intelligence also are the ones who then tend to turn around and say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it now. And this is just a long-standing thing. We all knew that this threat existed, so this is nothing new, therefore don't do anything about it. But I think by having, if North Korea were to say, launch a TD to Taepodong to much greater distance, there will again be shock. Why wasn't I informed? It's like, well, they've been increasing their effective range with every test. So when they demonstrate be able to hit Hawaii or further, then I think there will be a concern for some. It'll say we need to strengthen our deterrence. We need a more comprehensive missile defense program. We need to reverse some of the cuts the Obama administration has made to missile defense, et cetera. Others, I think, will see it as, well, for South Korea, they're already threatened by 700 missiles. And we've suspected that, they've been moving towards a miniaturization for some number of years. This is simply, the culmination of that. So it'll be a frustratingly contradictory response by folks both here and in Asia. I don't see it really leading to either South Korea or Japan pursuing nuclear weapons or South Korea. And as for reintroducing U.S. tactical nukes, when that was raised recently by some legislators, I think the U.S. was pretty firm in saying that's not going to happen because we don't really need to reintroduce onto land U.S. Tactical nuclear systems. We feel we can do it both with naval and air assets.
Well, I want to bring this to a close. Before I do that, I want to give the panelists a final say if you have a final comment. Meredith?
No, what these guys do is much scarier than what I do, so I've been learning a lot.
Bruce?
I'll pass, thanks.
Well, I want to...
There's nothing as dangerous and scary as trade negotiations.
Well, I want to thank the panelists for a terrific discussion and overview. I want to thank Minister Lee, who had to leave to go to another meeting. I'm not a betting man, but come next year, I think he's one of the horses to bet on in the Korean presidential election. I want to thank President David Abshire and the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. I would like to also thank my Chairman of the Advisory Council, Ambassador Hubbard, and thank you, all of you, for staying and participating in this terrific discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.